One evening, a luxurious cruise steamship left the port city of Novorossiysk, but instead of Sochi, it set the course for a collision. No captain was on the bridge, and it was up to the crew to make a fateful decision. They spent the following 12 minutes correcting the course, hoping to evade a catastrophe and save over 1,000 people aboard. However, they ended up short of just a few seconds to succeed. Instead of decommissioning, a giant steamship named Admiral Nakhimov sank and took its passengers with it. But how could the largest shipwreck in the Black Sea have happened if it had been predicted long before? As always, viewer discretion is advised. It was total luxury, an open pool, bars and restaurants jam-packed with delicacies, a cinema and various kinds of entertainment and rest in comfortable cabins. On August 29, 1986, the Ukrainian port city of Odessa was saying goodbye to the legendary USSR steamship named Admiral Nakhimov, which was leaving for another cruise. For that time, it was a flagman ship with a level of luxury, service, and comfort previously unseen by Soviet people. The ship visited all the most prestigious Black Sea resorts, so it was popular among the local stars. Regular citizens couldn't obtain the cruise tickets even for money. They were reserved for elites from the military and the Communist Party. The ship symbolized luxurious life in the Soviet Union, but the entire truth was lurking behind the scenes of Admiral Nakhimov. It might seem like working on this magnificent vessel would be prestigious, but it was anything but. Not only did the crew members break their backs for pennies, but they were all penalized citizens. This domestic cruise was reserved for those without prior experience or those who'd already crossed the line and had their foreign visa revoked. To make some money on the side, the crew members welcomed extra unauthorized passengers aboard. Moreover, Vadim Markov, the steamship's captain at the time, was also a delinquent. He'd been caught partaking in currency speculation on international voyages and sent to Admiral Nakhimov as a punishment. The entire crew knew Markov couldn't care less about them and the ship. He was only there to win back his superior's trust and his visa. The steamship's condition also left much to be desired. This 174-meter giant was built as far back as in 1925 in Germany. During World War II, the ship served as a floating hospital and was sunken. 2 years later, the Soviets pulled her out of the water, repaired her, and turned her into the famous first-class passenger steamship Admiral Nakhimov. However, decades of active sailing, as well as poor servicing and modernization, turned the ship into a ticking time bomb. A vessel like this was supposed to have several hermetically sealed waterproof compartments below the waterline. This would have ensured that the ship would stay afloat even if 2 adjacent compartments got flooded. However, after introducing additional structures, such as the deck swimming pool, Admiral Nakhimov became considerably heavier and could stay on the surface with a maximum of 1 flooded compartment. According to seafaring regulations, it was only supposed to carry up to 600 passengers. However, the official number of people aboard amounted to 1,243, including the crew, and the illegal ticket sales by the sailors made the actual number even higher. But it was just the beginning. Although Admiral Nakhimov's hull could serve for another 100 years, the rest of the equipment didn't align even with the most basic safety regulations. Everything was old and lacking the necessary servicing, including the safety boats and the system to lower them into the water. The crew was supposed to hold emergency drills several times a month, but after the arrival of Captain Markov, they didn't do it at all. To finish it all off, Admiral Nakhimov was entering its August cruise after already being decommissioned. A decree stipulating its disposal was signed on July 8th, since the ship was literally falling apart. And you know what? All the bosses imaginable knew about this. But every single one ignored this information because the cruise liner kept the cash flowing. However, that particular journey was supposed to be Admiral Nakhimov's final voyage. And that's exactly what happened. On the afternoon of August 31st, 2 days after the start of the cruise, the steamship arrived in Novorossiysk. The passengers had a few hours for a walk, and at 10 p.m., the ship was supposed to resume sailing. However, Admiral Nakhimov left the port 10 minutes late. According to unofficial data, the reason for that was that the vessel waited for the top KGB official in the Odessa region with his family. This delay caused the course of Admiral Nakhimov to cross that of a freight carrier named Pyotr Vasev. According to maritime rules, a passenger steamship should yield to a cargo vessel. However, the coastal station officer requested that the captain of Pyotr Vasev give way to the cruise liner, likely to prevent further delays. The freighter was being steered by Viktor Tichenko, an experienced captain. However, his crew had noticed he was an extreme enthusiast since he sometimes let the ship pass neighboring vessels at too close a distance. After all, his ship was a brand new giant Japanese vessel equipped with a battering ram in the front. It was actually a so-called bulbous bow, which made the vessel more stable, fast, and buoyant. And perhaps it also made the captain of Pyotr Vasev too confident. In the meantime, the person in charge aboard Admiral Nakhimov was second mate Alexander Chudnovsky. After ensuring everything was going well, Captain Markov left the bridge. Rumor had it that he'd set up a dinner in his room for the Odessa KGB official, hoping he'd help him get his visa back. That's why Markov didn't have the slightest idea of what was going on with the ship, and she was changing course. This also went unnoticed by the passengers, since right after the departure, discos, concerts, and film screenings started. So the guests were either having fun or getting ready for bed in their cabins. Only Chudnovsky was intently looking at the pale lights aboard Pyotr Vasev. He was worried the two ships were getting dangerously close. He radioed the freighter several times, only to be told everything was okay. However, Chudnovsky would rather believe his own eyes. So at 11:05 p.m., when the two vessels were 3,700 meters apart, he shifted his ship a few degrees, which was barely noticeable. The equipment aboard Pyotr Vasev didn't detect such a tiny change. Captain Tichenko relied exclusively on his devices, disregarding the scattered lights of the cruiser liner that just kept getting closer. When the ships were slightly over 2,000 meters apart, Chudnovsky course-corrected once again and informed Pyotr Vasev that they were on a collision course. 2 minutes later, he again altered Nakhimov's trajectory and asked whether the cargo ship had stopped its engines. Captain Tichenko responded positively, but he was lying. Pyotr Vasev was still going at medium speed, and only after this question were its engines halted. However, the giant freight ship kept moving forward by inertia. Then Chudnovsky's hysterical scream was heard aboard Vasev. He was demanding that they immediately apply full astern power. Captain Tichenko sounded 3 warning hoots and fulfilled the request. It was 11:10 p.m., and the distance between the ships was down to a catastrophic 125 meters. Chudnovsky gave the all-aport command, and Tichenko shouted, "All a starboard." Vasev was going 10 kilometers per hour, and it looked like the two giants would miss each other safely. However, for that, they lacked 6 seconds. Pyotr Vasev rammed its nose into the starboard of Admiral Nakhimov. The lights went out aboard the steamship, and chaos ensued. The passengers were running in the narrow corridors to their cabins, where their children were sleeping, or conversely, were rushing to the deck. No one understood what was happening until, half a minute later, Nakhimov made a dramatic and fast tilt to the right. It was virtually impossible to remain standing. In the music room, dozens of passengers were flung onto the bulletproof panoramic window, tightly pressed against each other. In this traffic jam of human bodies, no one could even move, let alone harbor any hope of rescue. A firefighter sailor, Gennady Sarayov, was just reading up on the studies of the sunken Titanic when he felt the impact. He rushed to the bridge, and only there did he realize the steamship was sinking. Seconds later, he was joined by the captain, who was wearing only a shirt and no pants. The captain commanded his chief mate to sound the lifeboat alarm instead of doing it himself, and then he left. However, the siren wasn't sounded, and no one lowered the lifeboats into the water. The ship's emergency generator failed in just a minute, and the equipment didn't work without power. Moreover, lowering the lifeboats would take at least 30 minutes. That is, if the crew and the equipment had been ready and the conditions had been suitable. But the reality was the opposite of that. Chief Engineman Valery Pletnev, whom the crash caught in the film viewing room, rushed to his cabin to get his life jacket, then ran to the deck. However, suddenly, the steamship shook, and the man ended up on the floor. At first, he saw 3 mechanics by the hold. Then he saw the floor under their feet get snapped in half, and they all disappeared into the gaping hole. In the meantime, a newbie aboard Admiral Nakhimov, sailor Vyacheslav Serbin, was cursing his first voyage. 15 minutes before his collision, he was happy for his buddy, also a newbie, since he'd met a girl and taken her to his cabin. The cabin was right where the Pyotr Vasev would hit the steamship. Serbin's friend had most likely been one of the first people to die. Vyacheslav himself went to his cabin, shut the porthole, took his life jacket, and returned to the deck. He joined a group of sailors, some of whom one of the first mates had picked to go look at the hole. Serbin wasn't selected, and in a few minutes, he realized it had saved his life. The steamship was sinking incredibly fast, and most likely the group of sailors was washed away by the water while wading through the dark, narrow, convoluted corridors. Standing on the deck, crushed by the crowd of terrified people, Serbin realized what had happened to his mates. He heard the entire vessel crack. The water was breaking the walls in the hold. Nobody knew back then that Pyotr Vasev's bulbous bow had punctured the steamship's surface, creating a hole the size of 1/3 of a tennis court. As a result, it flooded the boiler room, the engine room, the food warehouses, as well as the room where fuel oil and diesel fuel were kept. In addition, 4 watertight compartments were damaged, which was 3 more than Admiral Nakhimov could withstand. And even that's not all. Most dividing walls between those hermetically sealed compartments had already been open. Moreover, the passengers on the lower decks had opened almost all portholes, since there was no air conditioning to save them from suffocating. All those holes made it so easy for the water to enter Admiral Nakhimov that the ship sank in just 8 minutes. In comparison, Titanic took 2 hours, 40 minutes to go down. Captain Markov fled the steamship when it was almost fully submerged. First Mate Chernovsky locked himself in his cabin and went down with the ship. Meanwhile, Pyotr Vasev had only sustained minimal nose damage and was maneuvering nearby. Nakhimov's sailors managed to get 15 to 20 lifeboats into the water. Those who ended up near started frantically trying to get inside the boats. Some were lucky enough to put on their life jackets while aboard, as if having accepted their fate. The rest of the passengers were just jumping off the deck, and some died from the impact or choking right away. Firefighter sailor Gennady Sarayov overcame his temporary shock reaction in the water. He saw lights on the shore that looked very close, so Sarayov decided to swim toward the land. But suddenly, he heard incomprehensible, terrifying wailing and realized that was the sound of hundreds of people crying, screaming, and getting ready to die. And then this apocalyptic scene was lit by the projectors of border guards from the shore. Apart from terror, Sarayov felt a sense of relief. The officials knew about the disaster and help was on its way. Yet, he was wrong. The first rescue boats would only arrive in 2.5 hours. That's because the port city was 13 kilometers from the shipwreck, and almost all its workers were already sleeping at home. Moreover, the sea was suddenly getting choppy. Sarayov started rapidly losing his strength and sense of orientation. Then, he saw a woman in a life jacket and asked for permission to hold on to her to avoid drowning. Soon, the pair were lucky to come by one of the life rafts and hold on to it. However, not everyone was this fortunate. Sailor Serbin decided it was his duty as a crew member to help others. He gave his life jacket to a man who was drowning nearby. Then he swam toward a woman and a child, holding onto a chunk of debris. The moment he approached, they started hysterically screaming and were shooing the sailor away. They were afraid that the stranger would take the life-saving debris away. Serbin wasn't discouraged and tried to help another girl clinging to a log. He pushed her to the nearest raft, but it was too crowded, and the panicking people nearly kicked the two to death with their legs. Then Serbin decided to push the log with the girl to the shore, but fate had another curveball in store for them. The giant Pyotr Vasev freighter had made a turn and was moving right at them. When the ship got close, Serbin saw a rope ladder on it, with a few people clinging to it. At the last moment, he pushed the girl toward it, and she managed to grab hold, but the sailor himself was being slammed against the ship's side and was on the verge of being pulled into the propellers. However, Serbin noticed the hook used to lower a lifeboat and held onto it for dear life. In the following minutes, the sailor saw his colleagues and passengers grab him by his legs, but get caught on the ship's propellers. Vasayev stopped for good in around 500 meters, and then its crew noticed the people in the water. According to varying data, they rescued from 30 to 60 people. However, there were still over 1,000 in the open sea. Captain Tichenko ordered to lower no more than 2 boats. Moreover, he almost immediately commanded them to return, supposedly because of a sudden storm danger. Meanwhile, Chief Engineman Pletnyov kept saving people from the high waves until the very end. He was in the middle of pulling them onto life rafts when he suddenly noticed that the victims were thickly covered in gray-black spots. As it turned out, apart from the elements, they also had to wrestle against spilled paint and fuel oil. These liquids were blinding and suffocating the poor people, making it difficult to swim and turning everything around them slippery. Those who managed to survive this hell were taken aboard a rescue boat 2.5 hours later. However, before evacuating, Pletnyov asked the others to help him tie several rafts together. This artificial island was used to retrieve dead bodies. Gennady Sarayov was the last person to go aboard the rescue boat. He helped to rescue others from the raft. And when it was finally his turn, the rope used to save him snapped in two. The rescuers had to try and get a hold of him with their bare hands, but they managed to pull far from everyone out of the water. The life rafts only had space for around 500 people, and in the first few hours, the lifeboats in Vasayov rescued 255 others. However, they also retrieved the bodies of 16 dead people. Sailor Serbin could already see the real scale of the disaster as he volunteered to look for the rest of the corpses, of which there were dozens. The last survivor was pulled out of the water 15 hours after the catastrophe. Then, the search for bodies started. There's almost no data on this operation since the Soviet leadership classified the details of the disaster. And after 2 military divers died in the course of the search operation, it was stopped forever. The total number of the rescued and the dead amounted to 1,243 people. That's 16 more than the official number of those aboard Admiral Nakhimov. So it looks like crew members allowed extra unauthorized passengers on the tragic cruise. Reportedly, the actual number of those poor people far exceeded 16, and dozens of bodies remain aboard the sunken steamship. However, the official data give the figure of 423 dead. Admiral Nakhimov got nicknamed Soviet Titanic. It was the most large-scale peacetime tragedy in the Black Sea. It could have easily been avoided if the ship's navigation devices had been fully operational, and the crews had been well trained. As it turned out, Vasayev's course plotting system showed its position with a 100-meter margin of error. And Captain Tichenko, for some reason, liked to tempt fate, passing other ships at minimal distances. In addition, he ignored numerous warnings from Nakhimov that they were on a collision course. The steamboat had actually been decommissioned and had no right to be at sea. Moreover, its outdated navigation system produced a reading with a 30-second delay, and data verification took 3 minutes. In a situation where 6 seconds decided everything. In the end, both captains were sentenced to 15 years behind bars. However, 6 years later, both of them were pardoned. Markov went back to serving in the fleet, and Tichenko moved to Israel. His karma caught up with him, though, and in 2003, he sunk along with his yacht. Regarding Admiral Nakhimov, people say that on a sunny day, it's easy to see her. The ship lies at a depth of 47 meters, just 3.5 kilometers from the coast. However, the mysteries she's guarding can't be perceived even on the clearest days.